welcome. My name is Kara and I blog about knitting at theknitmckinley.com. I also sell patterns and project bags on Ravelry and on Etsy. And here on YouTube, I have been doing yarn reviews. So I have a new hat out today, the portside hat. And while I am going to do a yarn review with the yarn I used for that hat, which is Lion Brand's Hue and Me, a collaboration with Two of Wands, who is a knit and crochet designer, I'm actually here today for a tip or trick video. I don't know if this maybe technique, except for the fact that I'm not going to show you how to make the pom-pom. What I'd like to show you is how I take a pom-pom that I have made and how I add that onto a hat so that it is secure. So this is a second version of the portside hat. I just did contrasting stripes to my first version. I have my yarn pom-pom. I also have my tools. You'll need a darning needle. I like the ones with the bent tip. You can see there on the end. And a pair of scissors. So these are smaller scissors than I would use to make the pom-pom. I've got my big old Fiskars over here. But these are the scissors that you would use if you were going ahead and trimming off yarns after you've weaved in the ends or your tails when you finished a project. So when you're adding a pom-pom to the top of the hat, the trick is you want to get it on there securely. And secure, I think, kind of means two things. It both means that you want it on the hat so that it's not going to fall off. And if you've got a fitted beanie look like this hat, you also want the hat on there securely enough that when you're walking down the street, it's not bouncing along the back of your head, which can be a little bit disconcerting. So through trial and error, I now add all my pom-poms onto my hats the same way. So I thought I would show you all how I do that. So let's take a look at the crown of the hat. So when you do like a drawstring closure on the top of a hat, you end up with, first of all, that nice swirl. I always love that swirl. But you end up with a little hole in the very middle. I'm going to see if I can bring that in a little bit closer, surrounded by the last of your live stitches. So you would have taken your needle and the end of your yarn, woven it through those last stitches at the crown of your hat, and then pulled that tight. So that is where, that is what I'm going to use as a guide to add my pom-pom. So I take my pom-pom, weave one of those ends through my darning needle. I go to the top of my hat, and first I'm going to find the very center, and I'm going to stick the darning needle into, let's bring this closer, the very center, and I'm going to pull that through a little bit. All right. So then I'm going to leave that a little bit loose, and I'm going to take my second tail of my pom-pom and weave that, or rather thread the needle with it. And then I'm going to carefully lift here. So I've got the one string through the very center of the hat. Then I'm going to go just one adjacent to it. So they're very close, but they've got a little bit of the yarn. So I'm going in between two of those last stitches from my very last row, basically. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull that through too. But I'm not going to, wind it around my needle, my pom-pom. And I'm going to pull that end through too. So what you should see is your two strings are adjacent to each other. And you're going to go ahead and you're going to pull that super tight. So this is going to sound a little bit funny, but the yarn that you use matters here. So if you use a roving style yarn, or a yarn that is more fragile. So for example, I was testing out, I was knitting with Mandala watercolor, which is the bulky weight Lion Brand Mandala yarn. The watercolor yarn actually was breaking as I was tying knots in it because, quite frankly, I thought it could withstand a little bit of tugging. If you've got a yarn that can withstand some tugging, that is ideal, because what we're going to do is, now that I've got the two wheat ends through the crown of my hat, we're going to flip this inside out. So now you can see on the inside, I have got the yarn going through right next to each other. So I do single knots. And here's the thing about your first single knot. You're going to pull that. You're really going to pull that tight. You're going to pull it so tight, you think you're being a little bit ridiculous about it. Now, the reason I mentioned the roving yarn and it breaking is because at the same time, you can't pull more than the force your yarn can withstand. That being said, I do pull super tight. And even a single knot with a yarn that has some wool in it or wool content is actually going to hold your pom-pom on there fairly securely, right? It's really just about putting in your yarn just right next to each other at the crown of your hat and then making that first knot really tight. So I actually do 2 knots. I'll do the first single knot and then I go back and I do a second knot and I just pull that down. And then make sure that is super tight too. So I think what can trip people up when adding a pom-pom to their hat is they don't pull it tight enough. And then they try to do things like add multiple knots or do double knots or fancy knots. And really, at the end of the day, to get a pom-pom on your hat so it is on there and secure, and you can see like this is not going to separate. I'm giving it a nice little tug from the top of the hat. What's going to get it on there is really making sure that that first knot, when you add the pom-pom to the top of your hat, is really tight. So now that I have that on there and I've done my 2 single knots, I'm going to take my ends and I'm going to go ahead and weave those in, trim them off, and be super excited about my new hat. So somehow this ended up being a 6.5-minute tutorial. Nonetheless, I hope this has had a little bit of helpful information as you go to add a pom-pom to your hat. If you did find it helpful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you have questions about this or would like to see other videos showing this kind of hat making step, please go ahead and let me know in the comments. I am primarily doing yarn reviews here, but I'm really excited about adding additional content to this channel. So thank you again. My name is Kara and I blog at thenitmckinley.com. Have a great Sunday.